Morning, everybody. Right. Ngā mihi o te ahura ki a koutou e tēnei ki te whakanui e te kaupapa nui, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to our last Environment Committee for our training. It's lovely to see lots of people here, and while it looks a bit lean around the table, we actually have 3 colleagues online for various reasons. And so I just want to begin our meeting today as we do with a karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta ki... I've lost my train of thought now. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hiaki ana te ātākura, he tio, he hoku, he hauhu, te hei Māori ora. Thank you. So, apologies first up. We have apologies from Councillor Laban, Councillor Kirkbanand and Councillor Bassett. Thank you. Councillor Nash has moved that. Seconded by Councillor Connolly. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye? No? The motion is carried. Thank you. Any conflict of interest declarations? No. Okay, so in that case, we will move on to public participation. And our first participants, if you would like to come up to the table, the Mainland Island Restoration Operation, Ben and Mark. Oh, I see you and somebody else too. So perhaps we'll just introduce yourselves. Welcome to our committee.
Kia ora, Council. I'm Robert Ash. I'm probably one of GW's newest rangers. I get to work in one of the most beautiful places in the world. That's just behind Eastbourne in the Northern Forest, Bering Head and Paramarahu Lakes. And also get to work alongside some of the great volunteers like Miro, who are doing fantastic work in that place. I'll leave them to introduce themselves, but I needed to say that Miro are a fantastic example of how GW is partnering with local volunteer groups, and we work in the parks team, that's me, works to support their work. The environmental restoration team gives them advice on how best to step forward. The key native ecosystems team is also helping to advise them. And the community team in GW has provided funding through the Te Awa Kairangi Community Environmental Fund. So without further ado, I'll let Miro introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Mark Ratcliffe. I'm the chair of Miro, and I'm also a trapper. With me is Ben, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Ben Bruno. I've been a trapper and treasurer at Miro for about 4 years now.
Right, but before we introduce ourselves, we just want to acknowledge our appreciation to the Regional Council for purchasing Gon's farm, and there we have a band of volunteers really keen to get involved in the development of it. Once you've done what you need to do and we can get access to it, we've got a backlog of people who are waiting for trap lines there, so we're ready to go as soon as Robert gives us the go-ahead to do that, and really appreciate what you've done there. It's a great extension to the work we're already doing up there. Right, you press the clicker. Just by way of introduction, we've got 3 core functions. The trapping, which is probably the most visible part of what we do, but we're also involved in regeneration of and planting of native trees out along, particularly towards the lighthouse end of the thing, and we do a lot of doctoral monitoring and protection both there and at the airport as well. We're currently servicing 1,500 traps, 100 volunteers, and we've planted about 4,000 trees so far. In the Northern Forest in the last year, we've killed quite a lot of things. The sort of goal is not to have to kill anything because then you've really truly succeeded, but the reality is we are still killing things there. You can see the statistics there. I personally cleared up one of the cats, and they're not a nice thing to have to deal with. And we're very proud that we won the Supreme Category Award for a Community Award from the Hutt City Regional Council, there for Regional Community Award. And I'll pass over to Ben, who's got the guts for the presentation to do.
So what we wanted to focus on today was about the mainland island, which is in East Harbour Regional Park, and talk about what we're doing to support the work that GW is doing in the forest already. So in 2006, Greater Wellington established an intense rat control program. So from the stats that you'll see in the page before, Mero's always, we've been around for about 25 years and focused on possums and mustelids as a priority for forest health. But to really take it to the next level, you need to do rat trapping as well. And to effectively eliminate rats, it takes a much higher intensity of either poisoning or trapping. And so, for example, working with other sanctuaries around the country, the best method is at least every other day that a rat trap is being checked. So what we've been looking to do is how do we help support Greater Wellington in terms of extending the mainland island that you guys have been part of. The recent monitoring results, if you can see the little arrows there, this comes from Greater Wellington and shows the tracking tunnel numbers. So you can see the MI there is 8%, and then in the rest of the forest, it's about 28% of tracking tunnels of experiencing a rat coming through them. So there is a real difference between the rat numbers in the forest and, in the mainland island and outside the mainland island. But unfortunately, we're above the threshold and where the target is 5%. So usually it is slightly under in the mainland island, but it's now about what we can do to support that. So as part of that, Miro, along with Greater Wellington, did a pilot of 25 radio-linked traps. And so these were developed by Oliver Seller, one of our committee members. And what these do, these traps link to a radio tower that has been installed in the forest, and it pings to say when a rat has been caught, and then also does a 6-hourly check to say I'm online, my battery's fine, and things like this. From there, we've got a dashboard and then also email notifications that go out to people. So what this does is it means that, like, for example, with my trap line, it takes about 4.5 hours to go in, and sometimes I might get only one rat across that 4.5 hours. But by going in and servicing traps that are filled with rats, you know that you're actually increasing the chance that you're going to eliminate them in that area by removing the species. We also have radio-linked traps in the bird protection areas as well in Rota Bay as part of the Te Ara Tupua around the bays as well. And yeah, it's a fantastic step into new technology and what we can do in the forest and supporting the mainland island. So on the right there, I included the radio mast. You can see it on East Ridge, so it is on the Wainui side of the park. And it actually has the ability to link with other groups, for example, in the Orongorongas as well, if they wanted to adopt the technology too. So working with Joe Fagan and Te Kawa Rob, we applied for the Community Engagement Fund and were granted that last year very kindly. And that was to extend that pilot from 25 traps to a further 250 traps. And this is fantastic for us because it means that we can build those traps in a larger scale. So we're working with a manufacturer in Seaview who've donated their time to do prefabricated builds for the traps. And then also similarly, we're using a built locally, a Seaview company does traps for rats that'll last longer. And we're working with the Kaitiaki board on Machu about placing a radio tower there too, because that will cover the front of the eastern bays and out to Rangalahu lakes as well. So it'll extend functionality. So yeah, so thank you very much for having us here today to present to you guys. Oh, just a quick thing we wanted to mention as well. I should have put it on the first slide, was we work a lot with the local community too. And Taranaki whānui have been an important supporter of ours. A lot of the planting of the trees that we do is on Taranaki whānui land out at the Parangarahu Lakes, which is a very significant taonga lakes. And then also the local Scouts group help with our dotterel monitoring, and the schools are doing a trip out there to see the dotterels this breeding season, so that's pretty exciting. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome, that's fabulous. Thank you very much. So questions, Councillor Connolly?
I guess the one I'm itching to ask is, so how's it working? Like, is it accurately telling you when rats have been caught, or is it occasionally telling you that rats have been caught when you go out there aren't any rats? Like,
every so often you do get a trigger
for the operation?
No, fair question. Every so often you do get a trigger that there's nothing in the trap, but that's actually still a good thing, because it means that someone goes in and resets it. The pilot was done right next to the mainland island, which with hindsight is where there are lower rat numbers anyway. So actually they weren't catching necessarily as many, but that's still good because it is extending the mainland island anyway. The pilot was successful, and we presented that paper to our partners at Greater Wellington, and we're looking forward to rolling it out in some of the higher density areas to really target those rat species. And then also what we've seen from the bird monitoring that we do is that there's been an increase in the smaller birds in the forest as well. So the riroriro and the miroiro, who are predated by rats, are certainly doing much better. So that's fantastic. Yeah.
I guess just at a dollars and cents perspective, how expensive are the radio traps? And I guess how much time do you estimate a radio trap saves on the flip side of that equation?
Yeah, it's a good question, because the time saved, because it's all volunteer hours. So for example, we have about 8,000 volunteer hours a year, and we don't necessarily feel that it's a like for like. It's more that we're being more effective and more targeted with those volunteer hours. So it means that also that we can extend with that dashboard, we can extend it to a wider community as well, to say, if you just pop 200 metres off into the bush here, you could reset a trap, obviously through training and things for health and safety, but that we could reach more people who don't necessarily have the hours to go into the bush for 4 hours plus. So it's good from that perspective. To your numbers, the trap itself is the same cost that we do for all the other rat traps that we have. So I think it's like $25. And then the actual device that does the link to the radio tower is about $60. But part of that pilot has been trialing waterproofing and things like that, so they last for multiple years. And well, they've been lasting for 4 years now with the pilot, so yeah, they can last for a while. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Duthie.
Morena. Lovely to hear this story here in our chambers. I'm interested in how the dotterels are getting on. How did they get on last breeding season? What's the trend over time, and what are we hoping for this breeding season?
Yeah, so we aim for a over 50% success rate with the nests to go from egg through to fledgling. Unfortunately, we don't get that in Eastbourne due to predation, often by cats, domestic cats. So that's something that we're really trying to work with the community on, in terms of people keeping their cats in at night. Having said that, out at Parangarahu Lakes and Bering Head, we had greater than 50% fledgling rate, which was fantastic. Trending over time, I can't speak to that, sorry, off the top of my head, but I think it's been getting slightly better in areas. So, yeah. And then Mark mentioned as well that we're now working with the airport, because there are dotterels nesting there, and we've worked with the Miramar predator-free people to actually re-engage with some of their traps for hedgehogs, because they didn't include that as part of their target species. But hedgehogs predate the dotterel nest there, so they've actually started trapping again to target those hedgehogs and protect the dotterels there. So that's good.
Just a quick follow-up. around Eastbourne Township in particular, the domestic cats are a problem, and you can't go trapping them because they're people's pets. What do you think the solution is, and is Hutt City Council assisting with that?
We're working with council to, this is slightly adjacent, but we're working with council to turn one of our volunteers into a council officer for animal control, because he's a retired police officer, so has the ability to issue tickets for dogs that are in the dotterel protection area. So that is something that we are doing with Hutt Council. Cats specifically, that's an ongoing issue that I know that the council has at least taken steps with regards to the tagging of cats. But yes, it's going to need to further changes. Yeah. Conundrum. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming in. Sounds like a real successful pilot, but I'm not trying to find fault, but what would you do differently?
Oh, I think as part of a pilot, right, you're going to have learning. So as I said, having the pilot in an area with low rat numbers meant that we didn't necessarily stand up a volunteer force in terms of checking traps with regular catch. And then also Oliver has, as I said, has developed over time better connectivity, and then also waterproofing has been an issue. I mean, you get all the elements in the northern forest, but that's all part of the learnings of the pilot. So that's as I said, that's things that we've learned that we're going to change with the rollout of the further traps. Yeah. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So just want to say huge appreciation from all of us, not just around the committee table, but also from staff, and I have to say, I'm sure from your community. Congratulations on your award, and I just really appreciate all you're doing, and please keep it up. So thank you.
Thank
and
you
it's
for your
lovely
opinion.
to kind of have you come in here and share your work. Thank you. So the next person is Jonathan Ravens from the Friends of the Belmont Regional Park. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Good. I had battles with this last time. I'm Jonathan Ravens, and I'm a member of the Friends of Belmont Regional Park. We are really an umbrella body that advocates for the park users, and for the communities that engage with the park. And welcome to another whirlwind tour of part of Belmont Regional Park. I last spoke to you all in February, and since then the situation has changed quite a bit. So this is basically going to be an update. So we all know how valued and important the park is to our local communities. We now know as well that this particular area that the quarry are interested in getting is also a refuge for threatened plant species. So updates since February, we have had we've spent lots of volunteer hours in there, and so the botanical explorations have revealed widespread tonga species in the area. We have high observation counts for swamp mamiri and rama, which are both threatened. The area is a unique example of a raised terrace wetland environment. This is something we weren't really aware of at the start of the year. And it really brings into a question Winstone's low ecological value assessment of the area. It now just doesn't seem to be the case. Their assessment doesn't take into account the abundance of nationally vulnerable plants and trees. It doesn't take into account the importance of retaining the landform, because essentially they'd replace it with a dome of rock. Winstone's recently reduced the proposed dumping area, and there's the quote, to avoid some specific areas where native vegetation and wetland is present, which is somewhat peculiar to us because the whole area is native vegetation. But since they did that reduction, new populations of swamp mamiri and valuable wetland have been found. And we'll see how that looks. I also want to note that to protect because it's a swamp species, protecting the area around the tree isn't sufficient. You have to protect the entire upland catchment, because if the swamp dries, then the trees die. So just to recap very briefly, what Winstone would like to do is to do a land swap, acquire about 24 hectares, that's the reduced amount, of parkland. That's 5% of the key native ecosystem, and dump 3 million cubic metres of rock on it. Two key points here that I'll just reiterate. Two of the areas that Winstone wants to give to DOC as part of the land swap are already protected by a QE2 covenant, and also that those covenants were put there to offset the previous quarry expansion. So in effect, they're selling the land twice. Oh, sorry. So just to quickly recap, that's the KNE part of Belmont Regional Park. The park extends for the west and the south. You can see the Hutt Valley running up and bottom right, sorry. And the area in red is the significant portion that the quarry wants to acquire. Come on, wake up. And from the public perception point of view, this is the picture that people see when they park at the car park at Dry Creek, and we would have to change it to that. That's actually the original area, so it's slightly reduced from that, but that's essentially what it looks like. So the recent updates. The first thing we did at the start of this year, we went in, we upgraded some of the bake lines, made them easier to travel. We've added more trails to ease the access into this area. And then in April, we took a group of 20 councillors, some of you here were there. And around that time, a grove of swamp myri was found, which we found was quite exciting. And we've since been exploring the area on a regular basis, 2 or 3 times a week sometimes, and especially the gullies, because they retain all the original forest. They were never farmed. So we now have 16 swamp myri, 20 rama, and these are both threatened. As you can see there, they're threatened. One of the reasons they're threatened is because they're susceptible to myrtle rust. They're both myrtles. And these populations appear to be well protected from myrtle rust because they're in east-facing gullies away from westerly winds. The swamp myri, we've roped it all off because the tree basically breathes through aerial roots that come up through the swamp. And so that they're pretty delicate, so they're all roped off. And the rama has also been roped off. And all these finds are verified, and anybody can see them in the iNaturalist app. To us, the elephant in the room question is, did the Winstone Eco Survey see any of these finds? And if not, why not? Briefly, I just want to mention the recreation thing. Our understanding is that the DOC decision on the land swap is based on the ecological assessment, but there is also a significant effect looming on the recreation side of things. They see genuine ecological and community value in the land becoming part of the Belmont Regional Park. But as I'll try and show in a moment, these new areas, or a lot of it, will be inaccessible to the public. So that doesn't actually happen.
Can I just request, because the 5 minutes is up,
Could I
so
request
just
another 5?
go. Can you do that? Sorry. Yep. Can we? Yeah,
Thank you.
because we are.
Yeah, I know. Okay, there's all pictures from now. We'll be quicker. All right. So in green there is the reduced area that they wish to take, and the yellow hatched area is in yellow. Sorry, is the original area. So they've pulled it into avoid a swamp myri on the west side there, and pulled it in on the north to avoid a wetland. But as we can see, this. Can you see those green dots? I don't think I've got a pointer here. But so there are swamp myri now throughout the park. You can see how the boundary's been brought in there on the left to avoid that first thing. But now we've got swamp myri up at the north, east, and south. And here's the rama distribution. And in particular, that line of green dots there on the bottom right is a pristine valley full of swamp miry and rama rama and unchanged. This is the total observations in iNaturalist. Here are 2 young swamp miry, and they're ironically framing some graffiti because Winstone's been sending various surveys in there and they've been spray painting the area, much to our annoyance. This is what the bush looks like, and I would offer another invitation to all of you. If you wish to see this for yourselves, we can easily arrange that. We would go from something like that to something like this. And in the background, you see the steep slope there. That's one of the reasons why one of the areas of the first block that they wish to exchange just is practically inaccessible. It would not be, there's no way you could put safe pedestrian access up there. So it's a complex issue. We're not entirely clear how the process works. There has to be proven net ecological gain, as our understanding, for the land swap to happen, and it clearly doesn't seem to be the case. You can ask me questions in a moment, but I have 3 questions for the council, which is, what is your view on the losses and benefits of the regional park and the position on the land swap? And what do you think you're going to say to DOC? Because you're basically going to advise them on, or they're going to ask you for advice on what to say to the DG.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So I'm not sure if there are any questions, but Leanne has got a comment in response to those questions.
Kia ora. Thanks for your comments and for your input on that. And the manager is behind you, David Boone, so he's working through the fast track process at the moment. Mm-hmm. I'm afraid we're unable to answer your questions today. I'm really sorry about that. It's a live issue and we're working through the process. So if it's appropriate and you're happy with that, we will make a note of those 3 questions and we will treat them as a formal Lagoima and get back to you when we're able to.
Sure.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? Don't see anybody online. Okay. Oh, Councillor Duthie.
So if I put your questions back to you, what would you want Greater Wellington's view to be in your view?
Very clearly to reject the land swap. The whole land swap is predicated
but noting that we're not a decision maker on it, so Greater Wellington can't reject.
No.
What would you want the comment to include and be?
I think it comes back to a similar thing, though. The whole Winstone's argument for taking this land is that it's essentially scrub. They say it's just gorse, you know, and they sent eco surveys in there. Their whole thing's predicated upon we have good land. Let's swap it with your rubbish land. What we have shown is that just isn't the case, and we're kind of puzzled as to why they haven't seen this already. So the Friends of Belmont Regional Park are strongly against the land swap, and anything you can do as a committee to influence DOC in that, we would approve of. The whole area is a fantastic recreation resource for Porirua, for the Hutt Valley, for Greater Wellington. And once the bulldozers go in, it's gone. Does that answer your question, Quentin? Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for coming in. And so as Leanne's outlined, we'll get a response together as soon as we can, but it's live matter, but as soon as you will, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that, and while we talk about Lagoima, it's not necessarily to use the entire time of a OIA, is it? It's just that that's the process we'll do. Just so it's lodged formally and it doesn't get lost in, it's this way it makes sure it's in the system and we will get back formally. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks very much for coming in. So now we'll I'll call up Sue Patterson, please. And just noting that we have a new bell. So we have a bell that's operating now. Goodness me. We wore the bell out. Okay, so we have 5 minutes, Sue? Yeah, thank you.
Excuse me. Sue Kafali Pattinson. I'm from Pinehaven, which is in Upper Hutt, the lower part of Upper Hutt. We've been there for over 30 years, so we're advocating today again for the Pinehaven community. I'm starting with a question to this committee. and actually everyone in this room as well, but particularly to this committee, why were the same rainfall losses used in the pre-development and the post-development flood models in the future case scenario for Guildford Timber Company's development? In other words, why were the same rainfall losses used for the forest that were also used for Guildford Timber Company's built development? Those scenarios have exactly the same rainfall losses. MWH, now Stantec, use 5 millimetres initial loss and 2 millimetres per hour continuing loss for the forest, which is the exact same rainfall losses that were used in the Guildford Timber Company. Why? Auckland City Council Stormwater Design Guide advises that urban development on a greenfield site typically causes 200% to 500% increase in stormwater runoff, but your future case scenario is saying that the Guildford development replacing forest being highly permeable will cause 1% increase in stormwater runoff. So that's 1% compared to 200 to 300%. In actual fact, it has been calculated in this scenario in a 1 in 100 year flood event that the increase in runoff from the Guildford development in the future case scenario will cause an increase of runoff equivalent to the volume of water of 50 Olympic swimming pools. So if you can picture in your mind the difference not being 1%, but being 50 Olympic swimming pools worth of water, or picture it another way. If you can imagine a 35-storey building, can you imagine that? I don't know if Wellington goes that high, it'll probably go higher. But if you can imagine a 35-storey building that has a footprint the size of an Olympic swimming pool, that is the actual calculated runoff from the built environment from Guildford's. And that is what you all here today, as this committee and as this council, are doing to our community. Because the rainfall that you have used in the current flood model, you are flooding us. And if you think about who's the you, it's been really interesting. We've been at this for probably about 12 years. We've been lobbying for this over 12 years' time. Really interesting, the games and the tactics and the stuff that we've seen, the lies that we've encountered, the thwarting we've had of bringing our information forward. But if you think about the you that you're flooding, I want you to think about yourself standing in Pinehaven, and I want you to think about the babies there. I want you to think about the Pinehaven Play Centre. I want you to think about the school. I want you to think about the parents. I want you to think about the elderly. Isn't the greatest thing people? Isn't that one of the famous whakatauki, 'tis people? So that is who you're flooding. On top of that, those who stand in this room, Quinton, Green Party, stand for the environment. Ros Connolly, you stand for the community. Right? What are you doing? You are flooding us. This affects people. It affects properties. It affects the environment. We're already seeing it in our rates increase. This is not about a development bringing in a whole lot of revenue for Upper Hutt and Greater Wellington. This is about the impact on people and the community. I end with your whakatauki, which is in your foyer. and this is about your integrity. We care for the land, we care for the water, we care for the people. We walk backwards into the future. And I'm encouraging you all to look back now and see that you're flooding us. And what are you going to do about it? Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Sue. I just asked, has anybody got any questions? No. Okay. Thanks very much, Sue.
You normally don't have any questions for us, which I find really interesting, but thank you.
So, Stephen, are you now going to speak? Cool. Thank you. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just give us a few seconds to set our timing.
Sue's been talking about rainfall losses, and just in simplified terms, I'm going to explain what is meant by rainfall loss. Sue has pointed out and asked you the question, why, in the future case scenario, did the model of the forest have the same rainfall losses as the model with the Guildford development in it?
No, just a moment, please, Stephen. Just want to check. Happy for you to do your example, but that's not going to cause any overflow or damage onto the furniture.
We won't have any fires. We won't have any floods.
Good.
We'll be fine.
Yeah,
Thank
cool.
you.
We'll be
Thank you.
contained.
This is representing, these bottle brushes are representing the trees, the forest, and the sponges representing the permeable soils up in the forest. And like Sue said, field tests have shown that infiltration rates up there in the forest are 500 to 900 millimetres per hour. When it rains, it takes some time for the forest to become saturated before water starts running off into the valley, into Pinehaven and Silverstream. Rainfall loss is water that does not run off the hills into the valley, but is lost to such things as interception by trees, evaporation back into the atmosphere, or infiltration into the ground. By contrast, a development with steel roofs, lots of them, concrete driveways, concrete footpaths, asphalt roads, is more like this rock. Most of the rainfall runs off. Now, your model of Pinehaven catchment should be like this, but it's actually like this. That was why Sue was asking, why does this model have the same rainfall losses as this model, with most of the water running off into the catchment and producing grossly exaggerated flood maps for the current situation? The auditor, Michael Law of Becker, whom this council engaged to do a flood mapping audit on the Pinehaven stream catchment, he discovered this. He discovered that your model had the same rainfall losses as the model with the Guildford development in it. Did he report it to the public in the audit? No, he lied. He said that the consultants weren't able to explain to him why the runoff was the same in both models, but they did explain it to them, to the auditor. But he lied in the audit, he misled the public, and instead of acknowledging that the model is fatally flawed because it's like the Guildford model, he put out an audit saying the model is fit for purpose. That's a false audit. So we have a fake model. It doesn't actually represent anything like what the current catchment is like. We have a false audit. And we also now have fraudulent streamworks. And my question this morning is, why is Kyle Christensen using a model of the catchment like this for the streamworks? What this model is doing, your model of the Pinehaven catchment, is it's shifting Guildford Timber Company's stormwater problem from the developer onto the public. You are misappropriating public funds to deal with a private developer's problem. You've done it by using a false flood model. Your false flood model, like Sue said, is setting us up to be flooded by the Guildford Timber Company, who are proposing the Silverstream Forest development now on the fast track list, taking the public out of the consultation process for approval. Your baseline false flood model is setting us up to be flooded in a big way. We're not getting any flood protection in Pinehaven from your $60 million flood works, because all those flood works are doing is trying to deal in some partial measure with all the unmitigated stormwater runoff that's going to come from the Guildford development onto Pinehaven and Silverstream. The solution is simple. Give us an honest baseline flood model that represents the catchment correctly, as it actually is. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So I'll just check if anybody's got any questions. No. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for that
There's minor
example.
damage, a few drops.
That's all good. That's all good. Thank you.
We haven't flooded you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Right, that concludes our public speaking, and now I'll go on to the confirmation of the minutes from the 28th of August. Has anybody got any issues? And in which case, so looking for a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Duthie's moving, Councillor Nash is seconding. That's good. All those in favour, please say aye. 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 Want to hear the ayes? Aye. Anybody against? Thank you for nodding those online. Councillor Saw. Cool. Motion is carried. Thank you very much. So item number 5 now. So we have Lucy coming up. Lucy and Hamish, great, welcome. Just noting everybody, of course, we have 3 recommendations here, so if I'd let you introduce, if there's anything you want to add or highlight.
Okay, kia ora everyone. I'm Lucy Ashford. I think I've met you all before, but if not, I'm the team leader for the Assets and Performance team that sits inside Roputai, the Environment Group. And this is Hamish Fennick, who is the team leader for flood operations. Sorry, making sure I was getting that correct. Okay, doke. Okay, so before we get into the detail, I'm just going to outline Greater Wellington's flood asset management process and how that ties into the wider flood risk management in general. So let's start with our obligations under the Local Government Act. So in technical terms, all major flood protection and control assets used to manage the flood hazard for the community are required to be maintained, repaired and renewed as specified by the Local Government Act non-financial performance measure for major flood protection and control works. That's a bit of a mouthful, and what does that actually mean? Well, pretty much we're required to provide ongoing flood protection as part of the scheme, which will have a defined level of service, and that translates to that level of maximum flood protection. So Greater Wellington use floodplain management plans, or we have equivalent agreements where there isn't a floodplain management plan in place for each scheme, and the level of service is often described in terms of the annual exceedance probability. So that's that flood level that I was talking about. Sorry. The FMPs outline the long-term aims and plan for Greater Wellington's flood infrastructure, and they're aligned with our asset management plan. And that in turn informs the long-term plan, which informs the 30-year infrastructure strategy, and those are our 4 key documents that manage that. Okay, so It's important to note that to manage flood risk appropriately, we take a systems approach at Greater Wellington. So there are many elements in our toolbox. It's not just about the hard infrastructure. So we have 4 guiding principles, which are up there on the left. So we avoid building in areas of high risk to flood hazard. We only consider new flood protection infrastructure where existing development is at risk. We establish standards of flood protection relative to the degree of risk, and we plan for climate change in assessing the degree of flood hazard in determining an appropriate response. So if through all of that we decide that hard infrastructure is required, then we have an asset management process that manages the rest. Okay, so going back to our obligations under the LGA, whilst the Environment Committee has overall responsibility to monitor the maintenance and improvement of these assets on behalf of Council, the committee, obviously, as you know, relies on the feedback from various committees and subcommittees, River Friends groups, to confirm the infrastructure assets are being satisfactorily maintained to the agreed level of service. So we report on our progress on this measure by reporting on the current state and the performance of our major flood protection schemes, and we do that annually. So here's just a timeline which shows you a timeline for this reporting for 2025. And we report on the progress on this measure in the annual asset management reports. Okay, so the major flood protection and control works are defined by the Local Government Act as those schemes that meet 2 or more of the following 4 criteria. So operating expenditure of more than $250,000 in 1 year, capital expenditure of more than 1 million in a year, scheme asset replacement value of more than 10 million, or directly benefiting a population of 5,000 or over. So currently, Greater Wellington is responsible for flood protection and erosion control assets across 15 schemes across the Wellington region. Okay, so how do we actually assess flood asset performance? So we inspect our assets annually, as I was saying. And once the inspections are completed, we undertake the river system risk assessment process. So of the 2 images that you can see, this all sits within the asset performance framework. And on the left, you've got the code of practice, which is a 50-page guideline document that just discusses the theory behind the assessments. And it has a brief how-to guide about the asset performance tool, which is essentially a risk-based spreadsheet. And that's the image on the right-hand side that you can see there. So the code of practice was actually developed by the River Managers Group, so the River Managers Special Interest Group, and it's all to do with aligning across New Zealand how we manage our flood infrastructure. So trying to maintain consistency so that we can compare apples for apples, essentially. So how do we assess the risk? So once we've captured all of it in the asset performance tool, we calculate using this risk profile. And the risk is just a combination of probability of the asset failing against the consequence if it failed. So if you take the example of the stock bank, what is the consequence if it does fail? Are people, property, critical infrastructure at risk? We can measure the probability of failure using our knowledge of the asset, its condition, and the strength of the structure. So I'll just give you an example here, which is on the Te Awa River scheme. The orange lines running perpendicular are the cross sections, so 100 to 200 metres spaced, and then we break them down into segments. So we start with the probability. The performance criteria is broken down into capacity, intrinsic strength, and condition. So for capacity, we're pretty much assessing what's the probability of whether the flood protection scheme will fail due to overtopping. For intrinsic strength, it's the probability of the segment failing due to the structural strength of the structure, so such as a stock bank or a flood wall. And for condition, it's that probability the system will fail due to physical condition. It's the same deal for consequence, which is what's the consequence if the segment fails. So it's useful to note that just because you have a high risk segment, it doesn't necessarily mean that the next one will be high risk, because it's all to do with land use. So hopefully this comes up. Yep, so there you have an example there. That one's considered very high. But once you have your consequence and probability of failure scores for each segment, you can assign a risk score using that matrix that's just come up on the right-hand side. And as I said, due to land use, the one on the opposite side is not necessarily very high, so that one's actually low due to the consequences. And that's just showing you an example of the each of the segments filled in. So, what are the benefits of doing this? Well, the first one is that we can communicate risk with an evidence-based approach, which I think is really useful to actually translate all the information, because as you can see, there's a lot of it that goes into this. We can prioritise our work programmes based on the areas of risk identified, which means that we are prioritising based on risk. We can identify potential areas of failure and plan how to address these. We can identify critical assets and infrastructure. And also, very usefully, we can identify missing information, which means we can target our investigations if that's something that we need to do. Okay, so I'll get into the nitty-gritty now, and I'll give you that overview of the 2025 flood asset assessments. So just really quickly, just a note about dams. So dam safety regulations did come into effect in 2022. The table on the right shows the required timelines for submission of the required documentation to be compliant as a dam owner and operator. So Greater Wellington has 4 classifiable dams. So we have Birchville, Seton Noster, Stebbings and the Barrage Gates. Officers are currently working through the requirements and making sure that we meet our obligations, and we're on target to do so. Just a note about Donald's Creek. This is going to catch up with me. There we go. So Donald's Creek Dam is no longer classifiable as its height doesn't meet the definition of a classifiable dam within the regulations. However, Greater Wellington is still managing that structure appropriately, considering the risk it does pose to the risk management system failure. So yes, we're still managing it as a dam essentially. Another point to note is that Greater Wellington are not actually the legal owners of Seton Noster, and we're currently working with our legal team to understand our obligations and what that means. Okie doke. Finally, some numbers. So overall, the asset condition across the region does show a slight decline compared to 2024, with an increase in poor condition assets. But it's not all doom and gloom, because the assets in poor and very poor condition now account for 14% of the portfolio, but that's only up 1% from last year when it was 13%. So this increase does reflect both ongoing age-related deterioration and refinements in our inspection methodology, particularly in those stop banks and erosion control assets. But despite the overall decline, 86% of the assets remain in good or good to moderate condition, which is very comforting. So as in previous years, the changes in inspection methodology do continue to affect the reported outcomes. For 2025, the program our inspections program actually extended detailed inspections to our erosion control assets and our stop banks. So we identified more sites affected by invasive vegetation and stop damage, essentially. This has contributed to the increase in risk in poor condition ratings, but as asset managers, that's a good thing because we can now address it. So during the 2025 assets assessment programme, 118 assets, that's 1%, were assessed as very poor condition, and 872, that's 13%, as poor condition. So of the poor condition assets, the majority are groins and stop banks, followed by culverts and headwalls. In addition to that, there were 66 assets unable to be inspected due to being buried under silt, heavy vegetation or high water levels. The majority of these were ripraps and groins, and they were assigned as to be determined. The flood operations team are aware of these assets, and they continue to monitor them closely for any signs of deterioration. But overall, 86%, as I said, remain in very good to moderate condition, and this provides continued confidence in that overall ongoing performance of these assets and the overall asset base in managing flood risk in general. So this table does show a breakdown of the asset condition by type, and it is available in the reports because I appreciate that's a lot of information to look at in one table in a presentation. So if I give you a bit of a breakdown just of the poor and very poor assets, the most significant issues reported were again in that invasive vegetation, scour and erosion damage to stop banks, and that loss of material from groins and riprap structures. So this just really highlights the importance of the vegetation management, asset strengthening and timely maintenance. Our officers are well aware of these assets and have planned and prioritised in the operational forward work programme. Okay, so I'm now going to talk you through the asset risk maps. And we'll start with Te Awa Kairangi. So at the Te Awa Kairangi River mouth, downstream of Estuary Bridge, this is inundated during a 1% annual exceedance probability event with no stop banks present. This reach remains a capacity constraint, so initial investigations have been undertaken through Riverlink, will inform the potential future interventions as part of the Hutt River Floodplain Management Plan review. We also have at the urban reaches from Moera to Strand Park, Alistown, Rutherford Street and Harcourt Wherry Drive, we have high risk primarily due to the stop bank failure. Operational works prioritise maintenance of assets in poor condition, and these are going to ensure these high risk segments are regularly inspected and maintained. Of the upstream reaches, we've got River Road near Hedotonga Park, Holdsworth Avenue, Moonshine Bridge, Whakatiki Street, Ebden Town and Naitama Park. These high-risk segments are due to asset condition, potential consequences of failure. So the assets have been identified and will be addressed through our routine operational works. And of the very high-risk locations, we have River Road above Moonshine, Farrison Street and Central Lower Hutt. So that limited capacity and overtopping potential during a 2,800 QMEC design event. We've got targeted investigations underway to understand the local conditions, but obviously Riverlink is being implemented to raise those stop banks, strengthening and retreat works, and that will mitigate those areas of risk. In Wainuiomata, we have two segments that are high risk due to the overtopping potential during a 1% annual exceedance probability event, and two additional segments that are high risk due to poor condition. So the flood hazard model updates and investigations are planned for 2025-26, and these will identify suitable mitigation solutions, and operational maintenance of critical assets has been prioritised in the work programmes. So now I'll move on to Kapiti. So there are several high-risk sections that have been identified across the Waikanae River due to the overtopping potential. We've got structural limitations and channel condition with targeted management actions underway. So there were no high-risk areas identified on the Otaki River this year. So if we go back to the Waikanae, the Otahanga flood wall. So the flood wall is predicted to overtop during a 1% AE annual exceedance probability event, with structural risk evident in about a 2.5% annual exceedance probability event. So the flood wall stabilisation project scope has actually been completed, and the next steps will involve progressing design, meeting with the Kapiti Coast District Council, Road Controlling Authority, and just to pretty much assess the requirements of addressing any service relocation, depending on what we do, which option we decide to go with. So level of service provided by the flood wall will be reassessed during the Waikanae Floodplain Management Plan review, and that will be informed by the updated flood hazard modelling. The other area of high risk is at Greenaway Road. So this section is also predicted to overtop in a 1% annual exceedance probability event. So the level of service of this reach will similarly be reassessed as part of the Waikanae Floodplain Management Plan review. And finally, we've got Jim Cook Park. So there are some capacity concerns there. The channel condition is currently poor due to gravel accumulation and vegetation growth. So in June 2025, vegetation was removed from the gravel beaches on the sections 230 to 240. I appreciate that's going to be quite hard to see on that map, but the more detailed maps are in the report. Additional operational work is scheduled for summer financial year 2026, so that's to further clear that vegetation and conduct channel maintenance. Given the dynamic nature of the gravel movement downstream, this will remain an ongoing management activity, so that's something that will go into our operational work programmes. We do have current consent restrictions which limit gravel extraction there to 3,000 metres cubed per year, and that constrains the amount of material that can be removed annually. So progressing that global river management resource consent is a priority to enable extraction of the required quantities to restore the channel capacity. So yes, that's Kapiti. Now we'll move on to the Wairarapa. So the 2025 assessments showed that there were several high-risk areas across the Wairarapa Flood Protection Network. So these risks are primarily due to overtopping potential, asset condition and erosion hazards. And these are being actively targeted through our work programmes. So to give you some specifics, the lower Ramahanga stop banks in this area are generally designed to a nominal 5% annual exceedance probability event. So upstream of Tuatara Bridge, for the 5%, and a 1% annual exceedance probability downstream of Lake Anoki. So there's no high or very high areas identified in these reaches, which is great. On the Waipua River, so that Masterton urban area, the river is predicted to overtop during a 1% annual exceedance probability. So a concept design for preferred flood risk management options was completed in 2025, endorsed by the Environment Committee and providing guidance for future works. We've also got, alongside that, projects under the Flood Resilience Tranche 1. So that's addressing the left and right bank protection. So to be specific, you've got Site 3, which is the cross-section of 6 to 8, which is a 45-metre rock revetment, and that was completed in April this year. You've got Site 4, which is cross-sections 10 to 12 on the right bank. You've got installation of 5 groins and a 15-metre rock revetment there, and that was completed in April again this year. On the Wainawa River, Masterton water supply pipeline, there's a high-risk section there, which is being managed through Takeout Uru, and again with the Flood Resilience Tranche 1. And if we're getting specific, Site 7, you've got a rock groin that was completed there in August this year. At Black Creek, you've got the fish passage improvements and rock regrading around the pipeline, which has been planned, so the programming timing is going to be confirmed. And if we move to the Waihine, the North and Kura Tawhiti stop banks, there are 2 high-risk sections there that are being addressed under the Waihine River Plan, and a request for proposals underway with specialist planning services to develop a consenting strategy. The design progress is ongoing, but we've been a little bit of delays there due to the landowner engagement, but that's, I believe, underway. Also at Fuller's Bend on the Waihine River, so that's west of Greytown. The high-risk section there is being addressed through the Flood Resilience Tranche 1 with construction of 9 rock groins and a 15-metre rock revetment, and that's about 10% complete now. It should be completed in October this year. And finally, if we talk about the Ramahanga River at Mount Bruce, we've got Rathkill College. So those stop banks there, oh, I've just realised I forgot to press on that. There you go. The stop banks at Mount Bruce, Rathkill College school grounds face significant erosion pressure, and there's a risk upstream of it bypassing the and flooding the school buildings. So the Takeout Uru Floodplain Management Plan identifies this as a major project. So further consultation with landowners is underway to determine agreed mitigation options. Yes, I know that was a lot of information with those maps, but if you're looking for more information on this, all of these tables detail exactly what I just said to you, and that's in attachment 5 of the report. And the reason I didn't put these tables up is because, as you can see, there's a lot of them, and they just keep going. But it's all there if you'd like to review it. Perfect. Again, I'm just going to give you an example here. So as previously, in previous years, Greater Wellington has used a risk-based approach to prioritise our work and target maintenance. So the poor condition assets within the highest risk segments have been prioritised in the annual works programme, while those in the lower risk locations will be managed through routine work. So it's not necessarily that they won't be looked at, but they'll be through routine works rather than through the prioritised work programme. So most poor and very poor condition assets do actually fall outside of the high risk areas, though some critical stock banks and growing assets have been identified, and we put those in the work programme for 25-26, so those will be addressed. And this just gives you an example of the Te Awa Kairangi one risk maps, but if you would like to see the others, they are in attachment 2 of the report, because yes, there are also quite a few of them. And this also just gives you an example of the operational works programme for Te Awa Kairangi, and pretty much what it shows is those highlighted coloured table column on the right hand side. That shows you how we've identified the highest risk areas and how they've been prioritised against the work programmes. If you'd like to see the rest of them, they're in attachment 3 of the report, because again, there's quite a few of them. Okay, so thank you for staying with me through that. I know that was a lot of information. I now request that the subcommittee consider the following recommendations, and thank you very much for your time. Are there any questions?
I feel like you need a special round of applause, actually, because very complex, very well presented, and the report was really good. I think the colour coding really helps, I agree. And as a kind of, the ward council, you kind of like scan your areas in particular and you're going, red, I'm looking for red. So It was really well done. So I've got a couple of questions lined up from Councillors Staple and then Councillor Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everybody from the Picton Ferry. My question is around the fact that we have assets that have deteriorated, about 1% of them. So given that we're under immense budget pressure, what assurance can you give me, please, that we're not going to just have this general creep down every year of about 1% until suddenly we're throwing our hands up in the air and saying, my goodness, we need a huge investment to bring us up to somewhere safe again, please?
Absolutely. So firstly, I think this process in itself is really good in that we can identify these issues. So we obviously will prioritise the highest risk ones. I think also we probably need to acknowledge that we will never be able to do everything. Assets in general deteriorate. There are always going to be budget constraints, and that's why we have a risk-based prioritisation approach. In terms of the creep, we haven't really seen that. And as I mentioned about the way that we're doing the assessments, I think it's more likely that what we're actually seeing is a increase in the way that we're actually inspecting. We're doing that in a more systematic and in generally a more technical way. So we're picking up more issues. So it's not actually necessarily that they are necessarily deteriorating. It's that we are identifying those issues in a better way. Also, in general, obviously 86% of our assets are in that very good to moderate category, which is fantastic. And that number has been very stable for the last 3 to 4 years. So we aren't really seeing a huge movement either way, but that's fantastic because we've set ourselves a very high bar. And I would say that our operations team and our capital works team are very good at maintaining it. So thanks, guys.
Thank you. That is heartening. If I'd got 86% in school C maths, I'd have been very happy. Thanks.
If I could just add to that, and also just note that through the LTP, Council did vote a significant increase in our resource to be able to deal with this. The lifting of the standard that Lucy describes is, we think, quite necessary, particularly as we learn lessons from elsewhere, from the major floods across the North Islands and the Hawke's Bay, and the litigation that's happening at the moment in Edgecombe. So that additional funding is not going solely into lifting the level of our assets directly through investment into our infrastructure and flood operations teams, but it's also going into make sure we've got the right engineering support to actually go and do robust inspections and make sure that we've got an equivalent standard across the whole region and we're not vulnerable, and our communities aren't left vulnerable by substandard assets. So I'll just say to thank you to Council, and you have voted in that additional investment already.
Thank you. And I'd have to say, as a voting councillor, that's the kind of evidence you need to support your decision to go, yes, this area needs more funding, which we did. Yeah, thank you. Is that all good, Councillor Staples? Enjoying the fairy pie, are you? So Councillor Connolly.
I'm in my own private cabin.
Ooh, cool, party. Councillor Connolly, then Councillor Duffy.
So I am not terribly comfortable supporting this paper, and I will tell you the reason. The reason is that the Te Awa Kairangi subcommittee has seen the Hutt River components a number of times already, and we last year undertook quite a large exercise where we honed down the information that we were wanting to see, and I don't see some of that here, which is disappointing. So my two questions are, so the key thing that the Te Awa Kairangi committee wanted to see are the poor quality and very poor quality assets mapped against those that are critical. And although you can kind of do some kind of matrix cross-matching here, where you look at the work program and see what's in there, I don't find any table in here that actually provides me with that information. So that's a key bit of information that is missing. And I don't understand why, given that it was something that we honed in on at the Te Awa Kairangi committee. So I don't understand why it's here. It would be, I mean, to my mind, is the critical bit of information that we need to know to make a decision. Are those 14 or 15% of poor and very poor quality assets, do they represent critical things or are they less critical? And we don't know that from the information that you've provided us with. The other reason I have some concerns is that in the Te Awa Kairangi, as I say, not this year, but last year, we went through a large exercise of identifying what the critical assets were and ensuring that they were on the work program. And so in Te Awa Kairangi, we've seen in Te Awa Kairangi, along with the work that the committee did to identify critical and poor quality flood assets, we've also had the increase in funding through the LTP, which has seen the asset condition reverse in Te Awa Kairangi. And I want to know why that isn't consistent across the region. Why has Te Awa Kairangi seen a reversal, but that reversal hasn't been demonstrated across the whole region? Why is it still going down, given we've put more money in? And that should be addressing that concern. So at this stage, I'm not going to support this paper. It doesn't tell me whether the poor quality assets, which are increasing, are critical or not, although you can do some kind of cross mismatching with the appendices. It's not there, and I can't make that decision. So those are my two questions for you.
Okie doke. Thank you very much. So when we're talking about the critical assets and the poor versus very poor, the way that we presented that is on one of, hang on a second and I'll get you the correct attachment. I believe it's an attachment 2, but it could be attachment 5. But essentially what we've done is we've overlaid the poor and very poor assets on top of the risk maps. So what would we, in terms of what you'd like to see, is this to do with against how we're managing them, so the mitigation risk, which is in the tables?
Just a table saying we've got 7 assets that we rate very poor. Of those 7, 1 is critical, 2 are moderate, and 1 is low risk. And then for the 1 that is critical, just making sure that that is on the work program. Now, I think that is there. It's just not, you can't tell because of the way that it's presented.
Okay.
Because we talked about like one of the, so I suggested a metric that I would like to see in the flood asset stuff was that we never had more than say 10% of assets in the poor or very poor quality condition. Now Jack didn't support me on this. He was kind of into more of a long-term metric that looked at ensuring that nothing was on that list if it was critical for very long, i.e. that to make sure it was going to be on the work program in the next year or the next 12 months or next 24 months. So I kind of support that a way of looking at it. But again, we talked through this in Te Awa Kairangi and it's just not here. So I don't think that's good enough.
I can just respond. Ros, perhaps we can talk offline because I think Lucy's attempted through attachments 2, 3 and 5 to meet that. We have a table of the specific assets and the cross sections with the probability of failure, consequence of failure and the risk and the remediation. We have maps that show the reaches with the vulnerability and the specific assets listed. So I think we're trying to provide that information. I note there's about 100 pages of maps and attachments, and so if we can synthesise it in a way that more medicine needs, we'll be happy to do so. But rest assured, we are trying to provide as much info as we can here. Just in terms of the metric, we have a discussion about like asset performance measures, and I actually do support an overall metric on the number of assets or the percentage. It's more just noting that at any given time we expect to have a number of assets that will fail to meet the standard. And I think the critical information for governors and for senior management to be aware of is what I term as a staleness. So when we identify an asset that is subpar, relative to the criticality, do we actually have a remediation plan in place? And is that remediation plan taking place? Are we doing something? Because it's reasonable that all the time we're going to be finding. So 100% target's not realistic and 90% target might be. What you'd want to see is that if we identify something that is critical, we are doing something about it. We're doing an investigation to the Moonshine Stop Bank. We have action in place to mitigate the flat gate and fix it. And that in 6 months' time, that's no longer showing as a failing asset. So I think it's, apologies if I didn't communicate that clearly, but it would be about having a metric that was reasonable and then having the right information to support governance to understand whether or not we're doing our job.
I totally support what you've just said. And I guess we've tried to have those conversations, and it's disappointing that they're still a way off being realised, because I think that what we're getting here potentially, it's missing the mark in terms of governance a little bit. Like, if we were presented with what you've discussed, metrics, and then a clear passage to see whether things that are in that list are being remedied in the next 12 months, like that's the kind of level that we need to be biting this off at the governance table. And instead we get this morass of maps, but it's not quite telling us the information that we need at the governance level. So work in progress, but yeah, it is difficult to get your head around it, and some of the key bits of information are buried if they are there.
Okay. Just before we move on to Councillor Duthie and then there's Councillor Lee. So is recommendation adequate to what you're trying to get at, Councillor Connolly?
Not really. I mean, I guess we talked through ways to improve the information, and we saw some of that information being differently presented through Te Awa Kairangi, and I'm not seeing it here. But I know the team's working on it, and I think some better governance metrics that would allow us at the governance table to, I mean, maybe I can formulate another recommendation around the work that Jack's talking about, but that doesn't kind of answer the fact that some key bits of information are not well presented in this paper.
Good. So do you think we need a recommendation, or should we just leave it? Because I think that was a really clear direction of travel, as they say, for staff for the future reporting.
Well, the thing that I find challenging is we've been through this at Te Awa Kairangi, and it didn't necessarily get reflected in this paper. So I don't really mind, but I just want to make sure it is happening.
Well, I think we'll not worry about a recommendation, because I think we've had a clear run at that one. So Councillor Duthie, then Councillor Lee.
Thank you. Do appreciate the work that has gone on over the past few years to refine and try and bring some of that important information through, because it is a lot of detail, and as governors we are looking for that key sort of major risk and follow through to the work program. I think my main question is to pick up on one that Councillor Connolly alluded to, and it's around in the Te Awa Kairangi context, we could clearly see the benefits of the long-term plan investment coming through in the numbers, and that's not seen on a regional level here. Now, I trust that there will be good reasons for that and so on, but I do think we need to be able to present something to the public that shows how that investment, because that was a major investment of new money at a time of fiscal constraint and affordability challenges, so it was quite a big thing to do as governors, and we do want to see how that has improved things, even if it's not necessarily in the asset condition numbers. So how could we, it's almost like the variation of methodology year to year as we improve the assessment is blurring the actual improvement, and I wonder if in future, is there a way of actually seeing the improvement come through? Can you standardise for the methodology to see how does this investment actually change real outcomes, because that's what the public wants to know, that their money was well invested. If that was a question, please feel free to answer it. It was.
Yeah,
Oh, good.
Yeah. So firstly, thank you very much. In terms of looking across the region, if obviously I've sort of assumed, based on what I've written in the report, that everybody has seen that for the Wairarapa, which is where we aren't seeing perhaps we're seeing some degradation in the Wairarapa. It's because the funding just hasn't come through yet, because it was all phased. So we will start to see less of that deterioration. It'll start to level out. So that's why, yes, for Te Awa Kairangi, the funding came in. You don't see that deterioration. For the Wairarapa, the funding comes in next year.
It's been staged over 3 years, so we've had our first. It's mainly an uplift in resource so that we can do more maintenance. The first phase was getting our operational teams into a structure that can manage the extra resource. We've done that. We're now looking to get field crews in to undertake maintenance. That's was scheduled for this year. Business cases in, and then as Riverlink comes on stream and we start to take over the extra assets in that particular reach, we plan to up resource again in that 27-28 period. So currently the resource that will actually make a difference to these figures hasn't been realised yet, but we're in a position to start doing that.
Yep. So that probably that is part of the reason you see that inconsistency across the region, which is why if you take the Te Awa Kaurangi report and the Wairarapa Committee report, there were some differences in the way that obviously the information was presented. And of course, when you look at it from a regional perspective, you obviously see that there is deterioration, but that isn't necessarily reflected. It's to do with where the funding has come in. In terms of the inspections, we currently have a team that we're, I suppose, are quite stable, and we're now looking to essentially that consistency will drive that forward. So you should again start to see this will become less of a problem from now on because we have a consistent and quite stable team. So yeah, again, that shouldn't, moving forward, we shouldn't see that issue. Hopefully that gives you a bit of confidence in that space. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Lucy and Hamish. I think the more you know, the more nervous I become. So it's I know all this modelling is really good and it is discoverable. I know it hasn't really made it onto LIMS and stuff, but do you think the insurance and reinsurance industry are picking up on this as they head towards a kind of like a risk-based pricing?
I am unsure. I would have to go away and have a look at that. In terms of the way we insure our assets, we self-insure, which is a different way of looking at it, I suppose. In terms of the way that we do our risk and assessments, like I was saying, it is at that national initiative level. So something that perhaps has got a bit lost in this report is that because we do take a systems approach, it isn't necessarily about the individual asset. So, you know, you may have a poor condition asset in the area, but that doesn't mean that the flood risk isn't being managed because it's a combination of a number of factors. So I suppose in terms of the insurances, unsure. I'd have to get back to you on that one. I could go away and do a bit of research. But when we're looking at it across New Zealand, and I know that the River Managers Special Interest Group are looking at, you know, especially with all of the things that are happening around New Zealand, what's happened in Hawke's Bay, Gisborne, there is definitely, you know, they're trying to drive consistency across all councils using this approach, that systems risk methodology, because that's a consistent way of looking at the way that we manage our flood assets, because as Jack said, we're never going to reach 100%. It's just not realistic within the budget constraints that we have. But we can aim for as high a percentage as we can, depending on our budget constraints. So yeah, but I can go away and get back to you on that one.
Great, thank you very much. Now we'll move to mover and a seconder, if I could request that, thanks. So I'll listen to that, or I'll move in that case. So do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Lee. Any debate? I'm fine. Nope. In that case, I'll put the motions 1, 2 and 3 all together. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? Nope. Okay, motion is carried. Thank you. Cool. Thank you very much. Well done. I think we'll just do one more because they kind of seem to work together. So Jackie Cox, if you want to come up for item number 6, and then we'll have a wee break for some morning tea and to refuel.
Hello everyone. I will take the paper as read because it's just a summary of work that we've done throughout the year and which has been reported to various committees, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Duffy.
Kia ora, Jackie.
Hello.
Thank you for looking after my son before.
That's all right. I made sure he got to his grandparents. I eyed him.
Yeah.
The comment, everybody thought he was mine. I was like, no, he's not mine. But I do know him quite well. Anyway.
Okay.
Sorry,
I won't go any further with that.
Yeah.
My question relates to floodplain management plans are very long-lived planning documents, 40 years or thereabouts. And in paragraph 178, there's a nice table of how the original cost estimate for the interventions was costed then, where we're up to, and what the total might be now. And there's quite a big change over time, naturally, because it's such a long length of time that the plan covers. I guess my question relates to when the original floodplain management plan is developed, there'll be a sense of cost benefit that goes into that. So how much do we want to intervene? What level of service is appropriate in terms of the cost versus the benefit of the flood protection? But as the actual realisable cost of that changes over time, how do we review that? How do we check in that we didn't set the bar far too high now that we know that the cost is going to be a lot more, especially when something like the HUT scheme, originally 150 million, now it's closing in on 450 million in total. It's hard, of course, because you're halfway through it. You don't want to have half a river protected to a certain level and another half. And of course, residents of Lower Hutt are well worth $450 million. No question there. But there is a change in that dynamic of the benefit and the cost because of the sheer length of time of these plans. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah,
and how do we consider that in our planning?
Through each project or program, we go through a business casing and just make sure that the benefit cost is still there. And if it isn't, then we will look to pause works. And I think we've seen that materialise in Pinehaven. And then obviously we do reviews. Now the reviews perhaps haven't been as consistent as what we would have liked or anticipated in terms of how regular they are, just because these documents are such substantial documents and to review them is such a process. So I would say through doing projects or programs of work, we're constantly checking in on that cost benefit and making sure that the benefits actually do stack up in terms of the outlay or the costs of the programs themselves.
And so one like the HUT scheme, which has gone up a lot, that cost benefit still stacks up?
Yes, well, yeah, I believe the major project at the moment is Riverlink, and we wouldn't be proceeding with that if the cost benefit didn't stack up. So yes, yes, yeah, I'm fair. I feel I can be very confident in saying that in terms of the benefits that project will have to Lower Hutt City.
Right. Yeah. And do we have any reviews of floodplain management plans that are scheduled over the next few years?
Yes, so I think just off the top of my head, Waikanai is a potential, Otaki, and then we are also looking at Waitahu. So those are our older floodplain management plans or quasi-floodplain management plans. Again, it's around priorities and balancing, obviously resourcing against where the greatest need is in terms of reviewing those plans. And then also bringing in how we do that at place in that catchment sense and make them more than just floodplain management plans, which is really where we need to be as the environment group.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No, nobody online. So that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. Now, I think we've all earned should we say 10-minute break? We don't need long. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. See you back here at 10 past. Thank you. And just noting we have a couple of recommendations, everybody, so thank you. I'll take it away.
Kia ora tātou, I'm Francie Morrow, Team Leader Knowledge Build Resilience, and I have with me here Kirsty Duff, who's our Senior Engineer in the team, and Kirsty's going to provide a short commentary on the paper.
Cool. So basically this is just flood hazard modelling for Donalds and Abbots Creek, which are the two streams that go around Featherston Township. Effectively this flood hazard modelling went through our flood hazard modelling standard. It's gone through peer review and also independent audit. We've done 3 sets of community engagement as well. Yeah, take my paper as read and open the floor for questions.
Yeah, Councillor Conley has a question.
I guess this is more high level, but in terms of going through the process, there's been an opportunity for the community to feed into the flood maps. Has there been anything raised by the community in terms of historical events or just observations that don't align with the flood hazard maps?
So we went out 3 times. One was an initial one that we went out with Wellington Water to show their stormwater maps. And we, at that point, was just asking for people's kind of what they had seen back in the past and any kind of events. The event we had the most information come back from the public because there's not much information in this catchment. The most photos and videos and things like that came from kind of a widespread of the township was the 2018, which is the one that we used for our calibration event. We also kind of used that one because the dam went in, because so there's the Donalds Creek Retention Dam, which sits on Harrison Street East above quite a significant chunk of the township. That went in 1996, so we couldn't use anything prior to that one. So that's kind of why we chose that specific one. There was a couple of things. One mainly was the pond around SuperValue, but that got fixed while we were going through this process. So there were a couple of things that were brought up as flooding issues, but maintenance had gone in from South Wairarapa, Kiwi Rail and Wakakotahi at the time to remediate those. So those kind of those photos weren't used. We would just use the ones around the other sides. We had a pretty good drone photo that came from the back of Featherston, and it looks down quite far through it. So we had quite a good sight of that event, which was really useful for our calibration. Yeah. Did I ask you a question? Sorry.
I guess I'm just looking for, I appreciate that flood maps are can be quite a controversial issue, and often one of the issues of controversy is that people have lived experiences that don't necessarily line up with the mapping. Now, part of that explanation is it's a map or it's a model, and it's not actually supposed to necessarily, in all cases, represent real life always. It's just to help us with our planning. But I guess I'm just looking out for any areas where there might be community stories or concerns that the model doesn't recognise fully.
I think it might be round by the railway embankment, but also there was one that came up around just below State Highway 2. One of the community members said that it wasn't that high in our calibration event. We went back and looked at the model and had a look at why potentially that might be. And there was just one cell that was slightly lower where our stop bank is. That's just an error that can occur within LiDAR capture, and we fixed that, and then it represented it more. So we took back those comments that came through from the community and actually refined our model from those as well. Yeah.
Oh, Councillor Duffy.
Kia ora. A curious question. In the 1% AEP, so the less likely and extreme flooding, you can see the ponding behind the railway embankment, but there's another big ponding just north of State Highway 2, where it goes red. I'm just curious as to what it is that is creating the obstruction there to cause such depth of flood water.
The section is that the section below the dam? It's State Highway 2, you saying?
It's that thing there.
Yeah, so that's the retention dam.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's Donald's Creek retention dam.
Clearly, I'm not familiar with this area.
Yeah. But obviously designed to hold those floodwaters. Yeah.
In that Donald's Creek retention dam area, as you come to the state highway, there is there's a lamppost that's got a marker on it from when the floods did move through there, maybe about 10 years ago or so. Has the retention dam been put in since? Is it as a result of that event?
Yeah, so the event that caused the retention dam was the 1994 event, and then we did a pretty rudimentary HECRAS model to look at kind of the hydrograph, what we need to look to hold that up. It was equated to be about a 50-year flood that happened, and then we put the retention dam in, and that is built to a 50-year level of service. So it's basically a culvert that goes underneath Harrison Street, and it's 2 wing walls that go around the side.
Right. So in between that time, the Territorial Authority has consented more property, more dwellings, maybe even light industry along that stretch. So they're protected to 1 in 50 now, but anything beyond that and they'll be flooded.
Yeah.
Okay.
That one. Can you just remind me where the headwaters of the Donald and Abbott Creek start from?
So it's kind of Donald's Creek is, so all of them start from the Tararua Ranges. There's quite a few small stream catchments that come in on the sides, and Donald's Creek comes. So I'm just trying to think about it without a map in front of me. It's kind of at the top before it goes through the railway lines. Is there a street name on that? It's not quite. Underhill Road there's one little tributary, you can see it comes around the side, and that's where it starts to become Donald's Creek.
So did the 2018 event, did that retention dam work and do its thing, or was it? Because that would be obviously its major test that it's had, and it hopefully won't have that one again.
It spilled around the side of the dam, yeah. So which is occurring in these maps. You can kind of see it. So.
Is that all good? Okay, I think that's all the questions. Thank you. That's excellent. So would somebody like to move the 2 recommendations, please, and second them? Anybody? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Duthie's moved. Councillor Nash, thank you for your seconding. Would you like to, anybody like to say anything? Debate? No? Okay, I'll put the motions. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, the motions are carried. Thank you very much. Right, item number 8. Parama, Matt, Michelle, Carl. Carl's online. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora, councillors. So what we have in front of you is a full information paper, and that talks through the impact of the most recent Resource Management Act amendments. This is part of the government's phase 2 amendments to the whole resource management framework. And as you can see from the paper, it's a fairly substantive amendment, particularly in the dying days of the current Act, because there's further change through phase 3 expected. So we'll take the paper as read, and we're happy to answer your questions. We've got the team here, the team behind us, and also we've got Carl online as well.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay, Councillor Duffy.
Since you've made the effort to come to the table, this paper is about short-term implications. Any crystal balls on the long-term implications?
Thank you, Councillor, through you, Chair. So we touch on a little bit in terms of the Phase 3 amendments and what we're expecting with the 2 new acts, the combined plan, etc., etc. So we're expecting that to drop later this year, November-ish probably, and there will be a select committee process. And at the same time, we're expecting the national direction changes to land at roughly the same time. But we are expecting the new framework to be in place prior to the next general election.
Councillor Ropata?
Kia ora, thank you for this. In terms of the implications for Māori, have we engaged with our iwi on any of the matters here, and has there been any views expressed from them?
Carl, can I open that one up for you?
Through the chair, we have had discussions at each of the different stages in terms of feedback on national reforms. So our submissions on the national direction packages were shared, and we're thanked for Greater Wellington sharing our submissions, and likewise with our partners. We are planning out our future work in terms of response for reform. The paper does note, I think in paragraph 6 and 7, including in relation to treaty settlements, but certainly not limited to that there are some implications, and we understand the Crown needing to meet and make agreements with those groups, including how settlements connect to the RMA. So that's no easy task in relation to settlements, but more broadly, much of the material has been covered. There has been feedback from our partners about the RMA over 30 years. We have all the submissions at the various stages, including the reforms from the previous government. So we're mapping out our next steps in terms of responding, because many of the positions are known, and to work through the best way to do that together, including for council structure too.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl. Anybody else want to ask a question? No, I think, well, it was a well done paper, so it would be probably why there's no questions, and we continue to be just in a state of shock. So there we go. Thank you very much for pulling that together for us. Item number 9 with Nicola Pete Nora.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Nicola Patrick, the Catchment Director, and I will hand over to my colleagues to introduce the item and sit in support.
Kia ora. Ia, morena, kia ora tātou, ko Pete Huggins tōku ingoa. Kia koe.
I mihi ana ki a koutou katoa, ko Nora mō tuku ingoa he kaipakahaere tu honohono o te hunga whiriwhiri. Morena.
Carl Hockey. Morning, everyone. So we're here to present this paper on the review of the Lower Wairarapa Valley Development Scheme. Note that there was a mix-up in the attachments, and so councillors should have received a correct copy of attachment 2 just this morning, and apparently Diligent has also been updated. So that's some links to some online material showing some of the history and background to the scheme. There's a lot of content in this paper, So rather than take you through it, we were hoping to take the paper as read and invite any questions.
Councillor Connolly has a question.
Yeah, my question is super embarrassingly basic, but I feel like it's not answered in this paper, although it may be linked in some of the attachments, and maybe other people are feeling the same question. What is the scheme? What does the scheme consist of in terms of asset and management, and it is never elucidated in the paper?
I see. Yes, that is not a simple answer, actually, so it's not a unfair question. I'll probably refer you to the map we've provided as Figure 1 underneath paragraph 12. I think it's at the top of page 215 in the order paper. In our parlance, the scheme is essentially the assets and infrastructure that's in the lower valley. So it's many kilometres of stop banks, drainage schemes, the floodways that operate several times a year, the use of the lake as a detention dam, the operation of the barrage gates that control inflows in and out of Lake Wairarapa. So it's a big system that is managed as a system, as an integrated system.
But essentially, it's a system of assets that we own. I guess the reason I ask that is because when those of us from the Hut talk about flood schemes, although we're talking about the assets, we're also talking about policy, which means that people aren't responsible for the flood risk in their own backyard. That has been taken by by Greater Wellington.
Yes.
Is that a thing here, or are we just talking about the assets?
I do believe there is a difference because of the history of this particular set of assets and why it was installed. It is a development scheme. It is not strictly a flood protection scheme. So a significant component of it enables land use through the groundwater pumps lowering the water table, which I guess you could arguably say is flood protection, but it's not like the flood protection kaupapa that we do now. It was built in the 1970s with that sort of landscape scale, think big type approach. Yeah. And the ownership of the pump assets is an open question, unfortunately. Yeah.
Thank you.
So the scheme involves assets that might not even be our assets.
Yeah, we believe, Bay of Plenty has a similar scheme in the Lower Kaituna where there are pump stations, and their legal advice showed that those assets are probably owned by the landowner. But currently we maintain those assets using money raised from the scheme members.
Councillor Duffy.
So that was actually my question is, so how is the scheme funded, given it has a fairly direct benefit to particular landowners? How's it rated and funded?
You're going to catch me out there, Councillor Duffy. So I don't want to get this wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's funded in the same way as our other schemes, in that there's a local charge and there may be a general rates component. And I'm just looking around to see if there's an officer who might know.
We got the thumbs up.
I got the thumbs up.
There you go, okay, sweet.
Passed the test. So it's funded the same way as the other flood schemes, yeah.
What would happen if there wasn't a scheme? So what? Just coming back to what's the purpose of the scheme? What is the function the scheme provides? And if the scheme wasn't there, what would be happening instead? It's sort of in the paper in terms of previous floods, but just teasing that out.
And I think that leads to the work that we've got in front of us, because I don't think we really know the answer because of the changes that were made to the river corridor in particular, right? So they've diverted the river out of the lake and cut a channel so it goes straight out to sea. Now, is the fact of the diversion part of the scheme, or is that just now how it is? Because we just maintain stop banks now and flat gates and do all that kind of stuff. Now, if we stopped operating those things, I'm not sure we know. We can have a pretty good guess as to what would happen, but some of the activities that were undertaken in the 70s, that sort of landscape scale changes, infilling of wetlands, straightening and narrowing the river, we can't stop operating that because it's been done, if that makes sense. So it's a tricky one, and that's some of the work in front of us, I think.
Well, I think we did, maybe not this term, but last term, go on a site visit. And did it involve, there's a part of a river that's kind of a river to nowhere.
Yes, you've visited the cut-off probably,
Yeah.
which is the old river course where it used to enter the lake.
And I think at that time, Mana Whenua were quite keen on changes that would more naturalise that. I guess I'm still a little unclear as to what the scheme is, what it comprises, and what the consequence of the scheme is, and what if we didn't do whatever the scheme is would happen.
Yeah.
So, but I'm hearing that really that's the purpose of this paper is to delve into that, and so watch the space.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary, and I guess I just invite you to. It is actually quite complicated. I'm relatively new to Greater Wellington, and I've been here for about 2 years. And I'll be honest with you, I'm still getting my head around it. It is quite a complicated piece of work. Yeah.
Barbie. Barbie Barton, Chair of the Farmer Reference Group. As a Wairarapa local, I don't know a huge amount about the scheme, but I do know that it did clear and drain a huge amount of land in the 70s. Whether we think that's a good idea now or not, it was a decision made at the time, premeditated, I think, with earlier work done in the 1950s. So that's seen a huge land use change in that area in terms of what that land can now produce. So you would, to look at any change in there, it's a huge disruption across a large farming community, alongside fishing and other things that have happened. Albeit the Ruamahanga doesn't run where it used to, but neither do quite a few of the rivers because of earthquake fault lines and other things as well. But this was a man-made conscious change to create high value productive land. That's the logic that went into have it. How people have done that, there's a huge amount of cropping that goes on down in that area. There are a few dairy farms, they're probably limited in that space. It's largely been allowed them to do arable cropping. And a lot of farmers themselves have their own pumps that they operate alongside what are the council assets, but quite a few of the farms pump themselves. And the Taronganui River does give the scheme a little bit of grief and needs a bit of extra work done on that. So yeah, it was one of those big schemes that was put in place. Does that help, Ross?
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Through the chair, just to highlight that the cultural context around the Wairarapa Moana is quite significant, especially acknowledging the landscape and the post-settlement space with iwi over in the Wairarapa. So in terms of the proposed review of the very significant barrage gates, which is a very significant structure, it's going to be a great opportunity to partner with the iwi over there and also to look at what the future might look like. So yeah, it presents a very good opportunity and a timely review to undertake. Kia ora.
And just to conclude, Chair, if I might, good set of questions. Look, the history that Barbie's outlined and the questions at a number of councils, this is a very complex, long-standing change of land use, profoundly in change of the way that whole system has been managed over a long period of time. Probably the reasons and rationale as to why it was done 40 or 50 years ago don't stack up in the modern day, and particularly around the mana whenua aspirations for that whole body of water. But again, as Barbie mentioned, this is an extremely complex area with a whole lot of rights and land uses enshrined in it, how it currently operates. So it's frankly one of the biggest issues facing the council and next triennium, across our whole region in terms of land use management. The purpose of this paper is to give the outgoing council a really clear understanding as best we can as to why it looks like it does, some of the history, and I think we will have to have a workshop out there on site, and we'll have to take the new council and FRG members and other people around that whole site to give a really clear understanding of the history. There's a very good piece on this paper around the treaty obligations that have come through treaty settlements around the whole area, and how we set up a process to consider the complexities of what happens into the future is a seriously large piece of work, but a very important piece of work. and gives us a period of time to get it done right, and that will start definitely in the next triennium. And we do have other staff members who have been involved in this in the past. You'll recall Wayne O'Donnell. Wayne knows the stuff back to front, and he will be someone we'll be able to bring in as well, just by way of introducing all the history and the background and the context of this. So can't underplay what a significant issue it is and a significant part of our region for many, many reasons.
Right, thank you very much. We'll conclude there. Lovely. So I think some are staying on. Nicola, you're staying on for the next one, and Jimmy Young's coming to the table for item number 10.
Kia ora. Again, I'm just introducing Jimmy, who is our Porirua Catchment Manager.
Oh, kia ora tātou. I'll take the paper as read, but just give a brief outline of what it entails. So it's really an update on what we've been doing in the catchment planning space in Porirua since the signing of the Accord on Waitangi Day. And that's working with our partners to develop a catchment action plan. And since that signing, we've also broadened the group out and involved others in this process, like NZTA and Kiwi Rail, Earth Sciences, Fish and Game, and community. Like Guardians of Patanui Inlet and Porirua Harbour Trust. And just want to emphasise that this is also, we're not starting from scratch, we're building off the work to date. So a lot of the key documents that have been used in this process, like the Whai Tour, the Ngāti Tour Statement, the old Porirua Harbour Strategy, and also taking on board a lot of the recommendations out of the Porirua Climate Assembly as well. So all those sort of actions have fed into the process that we've been running. To date, over August, September, we've held 3 workshops involving subject matter experts across all those sort of organisations I've mentioned, including our own, and focusing on areas sediment, pollutants, and then restoring habitat. So those have been the core focuses of the 3 workshops to date. And all this work in terms of the catchment plan is going to be framed in a Tiwai Ora o Parirua framework, which is a Māori ora framework developed by Ngāti Toa Rangatira. So that's quite an exciting part, I think, of this process, as well as how we're looking to do it. And that framework sort of looks at outcomes in a simple sense for the people as well as for the environment, and acknowledges the interrelationship between the two for the harbour. Next steps in October, we've got some prioritisation workshops. So the key thing, I think, for this process, which is different to others, is that we're going to have a go at prioritising actions rather than just having a massive list of them. So that's the challenge ahead of us in October, with that group coming to a conclusion about what we think are going to be the most effective and feasible actions to have the biggest impact on the harbour. With the aim of having a draft plan by Christmas. So, yeah, and I'll leave it there and happy to take any questions.
Councillor Ropata.
Thank you, great report. It was nice to read. And always good to see Te Aurui o Porirua Whaitua implementation program there, and Ngāti Toa Statement, which was a significant piece of work at the time. Because I don't know the 200 actions off by heart, my question is, has wetlands been discussed in terms of its relationship to sedimentation? And I'm particularly thinking, Jimmy, of our recent trip up to the forest in Pawatahanui, and it's sort of a number of lightning bolts went off for me. But I just thought maybe it's because it's too low level and it's not featuring in here. But I wonder if it's an action that people have been talking about.
Through the chair, Councillor Rapata. Yeah, it came up through the sediment workshops in terms of how both constructed wetlands, because we have one, there's one in Elston and also one to be proposed at Cannons Creek, as well as natural wetlands can help in that space, and pollutants as well. That constructed wetland they have in Elston captures pollutants and stormwater runoff from that sort of 25 hectare sub-catchment. And also in restoring habitat, wetlands was a focus area, one of the 5 focus areas that we talked about in the Restoring Habitats workshop. So yeah, it'll be very prominent.
Just another quick question: if you could predict the future, what impacts do you think that the new poo pond at railway station will have on the harbour?
Well, I haven't been involved in that project, but my understanding is significant, because without that facility, there was 12 overflows approximately each year, and with it, that'll be limited to 2. So a significant impact, I would think.
Councillor Thor has a question.
Kia ora everyone, thanks for this report. I just, I guess there's a question or a concern just around whether the group, Ropu, is considering how it's going to interact with the new water entity, given that the draft delivery plan has been released, and some of the foundation documents in terms of how it will do its work could have some material and financial consequence on some of the aspirations of the Harbour Accord. And with that also, when you're talking about a sort of tranche of actions that are going to be prioritised, will the group be using some sort of criteria to determine that prioritisation, given that we are about to enter into having a new water entity?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Saw. I can try and part answer that question. Yes, certainly in terms of that local water done well and those papers we had worked with policy and through our partner organisations to ensure that the accord was in there some way, enshrined in it to give effect and hopefully give effect to it through the new water entity. And sorry, I'm not sure what the second part of that question was. Criteria, yeah, I think it will be a challenge. Certainly we see that as a challenge and a risk, the new entity, definitely, because that's going to have a regional focus, and getting things for Porirua will be potentially a challenge. But given the organisations we have around the table and their collective effort there, we expect that to have a difference. And in terms of the prioritisation, yes, certainly in that pollutants space, that's the main one with stormwater and wastewater that we see being affected. And we may have to tweak and adjust once we see what that entity looks like as it stood up next year. That's probably about as best I could do.
Do you think more needs to be done in a space at that governance level, or with those who have signed up to the Accord that also work across the AOG?
It's quite hard to hear that.
And this might be more of a council to council question, because I think I just can see that in the operational and sort of delivery side of it, that what we all these entities have aspirations, all these groups have signed up have aspirations to improve the health of the Te Porirua, and our practice and the way that things are constructed in a new entity, that a lot of we could be walking into more problems than we've even started with.
Oh, I think I got some of that. Yeah, there could well be, there may be a disconnect there, and we're certainly looking at solutions that are both infrastructure based, so big things, which are more long term, like those wastewater holding facilities, as well as looking at things we can do like at source as well, and that's things like cross connections and things which are probably easier to implement in the short term, and boosting programs like that. So yeah, I think we have to approach those challenges that we'll have through the new water entity from a number of different angles.
Thank you, Councillor Saw. Just noting that your connection was really a bit scratchy. So if there's anything you want to do around, perhaps follow up with Jimmy, perhaps that could be down the track. Councillor Duthie.
Thank you. Just thinking about the new council incoming, have we thought about, or could we organise some sort of induction around that's focused on this, maybe in Porirua for Greater Wellington Regional Council as when they reform, perhaps with Porirua City Councillors, Wellington City Councillors too, just sort of get a share the sense of what the purpose of this is for, what the actions look like, what might be coming down the work program over the next few years for those interested parties. Especially since we're in this sort of defining the actions and prioritising them phase, it's a good time to have some concrete things to talk about.
Yes, definitely would welcome that opportunity for sure. I believe Ngāti Toa, we're yet to confirm it, but we'll have some sort of council induction process as well through the runanga. That would certainly feature a chord as part of that as well. Yeah.
We could all go for a swim.
In 2050.
Yeah, no, you won't be coming. I don't, well, I'm joking, because you won't be, we know you won't be here. Okay, he's back. That makes me think that want a suggestion about how because there's so many things to kind of be inducted about, that maybe an approach to it could be catchment by catchment, because there's a lot of things in each catchment. So yeah, just one way of how we manage that. Sorry? Oh, Nigel? Oh, hi Nigel.
Yeah, look, we are obviously actively looking at an induction program as we speak. We've had a lot of input from outgoing councillors. Other people want to induct you and be, getting in touch with the new council, NZTA, the new water entity. I'm sure will be another example. To go back to Councillor Saw's question, I actually feel reasonably comfortable that the new water entity will address the regional issues quite well, including in Porirua, and I think it's going to be advantageous as opposed to the situation now. That remains to be seen, but that's how I feel. And back to the induction. So yes, we will have a very comprehensive suite of induction programs for the incoming council to consider, and the way it's stacking up, that might be staged over 6 to 8 to 12 months, which is kind of actually realistically what it will take to get around the region in a way that we would like to get the new council to be taken around the region in the way that the new council will be able to have input into what and when and how you want to stage it. So very keen to get the new council out and about, meeting our partners and seeing our rohe and the key issues. So any input into that, as we just received, is very gratefully received.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's great. I don't see any other questions, so sorted. Again, Nicola's going to stay there because batter up, we now have Tim.
And I'll just welcome the team and just hand over to them to introduce themselves.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you. Morena tātou. I'm Tim Sharp.
Morena, and I'm Michaela Seelan in Tim's team.
So this paper just provides an update on the work we're collaborating on in Waifatu, and we'll take the paper as read, but just wanted to emphasise for you that the success of this project does rely on a fairly major shift to current planning and investment in Waifatu. Being between LTP cycles, our work over the last 18 months has focused on relationship building and knowledge sharing and establishing baselines, identifying opportunities, filling gaps in information. We've done some good drone footage, and ensuring appropriate tikanga for the project. So what that means in practice is that Te Runanga or Te Atiawa are leading the project with initial wānanga in a fortnight. And yes, just to note that if we want to achieve the outcomes sought for in Waifatu, that'll be a question for the new council to consider, I guess, alongside other priorities. We're going to need to be really tight with Hutt City and Wellington Water, Metro Water at all levels, especially governance, because it will require joint funding. Kia ora.
Lovely, thank you very much. Question, first one up from Councillor Connolly.
Thank you for this paper, and thank you for the project. It is awesome to see this being taken forward. I guess my only concern was that when Taranaki Whānui first talked to us on this subject, their key concern or priority was the Seaview Urupā. I just wanted to check that hadn't got lost in this sort of becoming a bigger thing, and that we were still, not that I can even think of some solutions to their problem, but that it still is on our radar and something that we are trying to actively address.
Thank you, Councillor Connolly. Yeah, absolutely. That the conversations we had with the Rūnanga have centred around the concerns with the Urupā, also the aquifer, of course, the concern there, and housing, flooding. It's really broadening in scope now that it's being led by the Rūnanga, and I'm absolutely sure that the Urupā will not be lost in consideration. Very difficult.
Other questions? Oh, Councillor Duffy.
I think you're quite right to observe that governance is an important role here because it's going to involve LTP funding at City Council and for us. How can we as councillors, or the next council when it's appointed, sort of be brought into sort of some of the flesh of what the this is likely to become and be part of the wānanga and development of it? So what's the role for governance to be brought along on the journey, so when we get to that core funding question, it doesn't get buried under a line by line review of squished fiscal lead weights? Sorry,
Thanks,
I lost
Councillor
my
Duffy.
train of articulation.
A couple of things I can think of is we'll bring to council all funding requirements. We want to see if we can develop something alongside Hutt City as far as a joint co-funded approach. That'll be a little bit unique, and but we'll attempt to do that. As far as being involved and connected by the wānanga, perhaps Michaela sort of project managing and organising the wānanga.
Yeah, we have a wānanga series that's starting to happen on the 10th of October, and it's working towards a community event that's led by the Rānanga, Tira Aotearoa Kura, and all councillors are definitely welcome there, so we'll definitely be in contact prior to that event on how we can involve you.
Sorry, what date was that?
The 31st of January 2026.
Is it all good, Councillor Duffy? Yep, lovely, excellent. Any other questions? No, that's great. Good. Very excited with this one because, you know, it keeps giving. Excellent. Thank you. So item number 12, Barbie. We have your report. We'll take it as read. Has anybody got any questions for Barbie on this paper? On the report? No? No? So I just want to say, Barbie, thank you very much for the reports you've been giving during this triennium to our committee. Thank you. And well, thanks to all the members of the Farming Reference Group too.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Penny. And we'll look forward to engagement in the next triennium with the
definitely.
Farm Reference Group. And the other one, just my perennial one, is Balanced Farm Environment Awards. We are looking for entrants. We've got 4 and we could do with another one if anybody had. Unfortunately, Mangaroa Farms and the Bests have turned us down for this year. But if you could think of anybody else in this wider region, would be great. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So is that's the whole Wellington, Greater Wellington region?
Greater Wellington region, so up to North Votaki and then up to just south of Ikitahuna, and virtually a straight line across, but there's not a hell of a lot on the top of the Tararuas, but anybody's innovative these days would be great.
I struggle.
Okay, well, we'll go on to item number 13 now. So, yeah, we're gonna,
Yes, this item was just in response to some of the requests we've had, just referencing where we've already brought this to Environment Committee. So it's really just for your reference. So we're hoping there's no questions, but that you found it useful. But Sala's here in case you do have a question.
the point of this is sort of like we make these decisions and we go, well, and then what happened? Where did things go? So they did go somewhere. And this is kind of circling back. Councillor Nat?
The one thing I'd say about this is, I mean, it's sort of highly procedural, but it doesn't, if you were a member of the public reading it, you would get absolutely nothing from it in terms of what has been done on the items that, you know, were in the LTP decision.
it just kind of refers you back to another paragraph, and you're actually pretty unlikely to be able to go and find that very easily. So my suggestion would be, if we're doing something like this again, maybe a couple of lines on whatever each set of paragraphs said. It probably wouldn't have actually made it much longer if you'd even anyway, it's just it's a sort of self-referential, if you like, not very communicative to the public.
Okay, cool. No, thank you. Good point. Anybody else? No? Okay, well, thank you very much, Sal. That was very, very cool. And so then the last item, number 14. Leanne, we're going to...
Yes, kia ora. So this is the last environment update of the Terranium. So I did want to draw your attention to just a couple of dashboards at the end of the update. We wanted to just give you a really high level overview of all of the things that under your governance that's been achieved for the environment. Of course, there's a lot more than that, but we thought it just might be a bit of a fun way just to kind of really highlight all that we've achieved together. And before I hand over for questions, because I've got the microphone, I just wanted to say, as this is the last Environment Committee of this Terranium, I wanted to thank you, councillors, on behalf of myself and all of my staff in the Environment Group. We really enjoy working with you. We feel very lucky to have had you as our councillors. And we also have really enjoyed your passion and engagement over the Terranium. And you've pushed us, and we've appreciated that as well. And hopefully you've seen those improvements in Environment Group and our reporting and our papers over time. I wanted to also particularly thank our co-deputy chair and our chair. So thank you so much to Councillor Duthie for your always active inquiry, for your passion for the environment and communities. And we really appreciated working with you. And finally, thank you to Councillor Gaylor, the chair of Environment Committee, who's been incredibly supportive, incredibly honest, has really pushed us, and we've really enjoyed that in terms of sort of improving what we're doing and the great agendas we've been able to bring to the Environment Committee's Terranium. So just a big thank you from me and all of my staff. And now over to you all for any questions that you may have on the environment update.
Councillor Lee.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the staff. And do you think that we can actually get the RPS operative? Because we're just waiting on the consent orders. Is that correct?
Thanks, Councillor Lee. Unfortunately, no, we're not going to get our consent orders in time for the last meeting for the Triennium. There's quite a significant backlog in the Environment Court, so we are unfortunately on the list.
Anybody else? Any questions? No. Okay. Well, I'll haven't written a speech. Don't worry. But so it's a very short moment to say yes, thank you to Councillor Duthie for being deputy, very supportive, and I hope you've really enjoyed being the deputy of the Environment Committee too. Thank you, Leanne, that all the staff of when they come along and present. So professional, and I love the vibe that we kind of have between the committee and between our staff. And we've had some very cool presenters within our organisation and from outside the organisation, and nothing is more heartening than when somebody comes along representing and sharing the work of the local kindergarten, or somebody online sharing their ideas, not that they'll be staying long term. It's just so lovely, I have to say. So it's a real privilege to be the chair of the Environment Committee, but it's a committee of the whole, and it's been everybody that's contributed equally, and I really appreciate how we've always, I think, always been so respectful of one another and of staff and of our guests who come in to share their perspective, whatever their perspective is. So it's really been enjoyable, and just thank you so much for supporting me in all the different ways. And the only thing I always think about as being a chair is that it is my role to make sure that everybody got to put into the conversation and into our discussions and into this organisation things that they wanted to be have addressed at our committee. So hopefully between Councillor Duthie and myself, we have achieved that for you. So without further ado, before Councillor Duthie closes with karakia, we do have a little because we know what we're doing, but sometimes it's about showing how we do it. This is how we do our mahi. Talent. I don't know what the group's called, but don't they do a good job? So, Councillor Duthie, if you could do our closing karakia, thank you.
Thank you. I have nothing to do with that.
Demo.
Me karakia tātou. Mā te kura tai ao, tēnei kura nei, tēnei kura roa. Kia horahia te mauri ora, ki runga I te mata o te whenua. Ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao. Whiti, whiti, tau mai te mauri. Haumi e, hui e. Ai.